My house felt quieter after my husband Richard passed away. It wasn't just the absence of his booming laugh or the sound of the TV permanently fixed on the History Channel. It was a deeper silence, a stillness that settled in the corners and clung to the furniture. We had filled this home with 50 years of life, and now it felt like I was the sole curator of our shared museum. The most precious exhibits were in the garage, on a sturdy set of shelves Richard had built himself. It was his collection of clocks. To an outsider, they probably looked like a peculiar assortment of junk. There were about a dozen of them, mostly wooden mantel clocks from the 50s and 60s, with odd shapes and faces. They weren't ornate or gilded, they were simple, some almost brutally so, with clean lines and unconventional materials. Richard called them his ticking treasures. He'd spent his life as an engineer, a man who appreciated mechanics and design, and he saw a quiet genius in their construction. He would spend hours in the garage, a tiny screwdriver in hand, gently cleaning their inner workings. "Look at this one, Judy," he'd say, holding up a blocky, walnut-cased clock with brass hands. "Most people want scrolls and gold leaf. This guy, the maker, he just wanted perfect function. It's honest." Each clock had a story, a memory attached. The one with the sunburst face we bought on our honeymoon in a dusty little shop in Door County, Wisconsin. The strange, asymmetrical one was a gift from his father. They didn't all work anymore, but their presence was a comfort, a tangible link to the man I loved. My daughter, Linda, worried about me. She'd call every day, her voice laced with a gentle but persistent concern that sometimes felt more like pity. And where Linda went, her husband Todd was never far behind. Todd was a man who lived in the now. He was a financial advisor, sleek and modern, with a minimalist house, a silver German car, and an opinion on everything. He saw my home not as a warm, lived-in space, but as an outdated asset full of clutter. He'd walk through my living room with a look I can only describe as tolerant disdain, his eyes scanning my porcelain figurines and framed family photos, as if they were liabilities on a balance sheet. He was especially critical of the garage. "Judith, you've got to think about downsizing one day," he said during a visit, waving a dismissive hand towards the back of the house. "All this stuff, it's a fire hazard. It's weighing you down." Linda shot him a warning look, but she didn't disagree. "He's just worried, Mom," she'd say later in a hushed phone call, as if apologizing for him. I knew they meant well, in their own way, but they didn't understand. This stuff wasn't weighing me down. It was what was left of my anchor. They saw junk, but I saw the beautiful, intricate machinery of a life well lived, a love well remembered. And Todd, with his sharp suits and sharper tongue, was about to make the biggest miscalculation of his life. The campaign to help me began in earnest a few weeks before Thanksgiving. Linda and Todd came over for Sunday dinner, and Todd brought his tablet. After we'd cleared the dishes, he sat me down at the kitchen table like a client he was about to strong-arm into a bad investment. "Judith," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, "Linda and I have been talking. We love you, and we want you to be safe and comfortable here. That's why we think it's time for a little modernization." He pulled up a slideshow of stark white rooms with single, lonely-looking orchids on glass tables. "Decluttering is liberating. It cleanses the mind. We could rent a dumpster, get this place looking sharp and updated in a weekend. It'll improve the property value, too." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I looked at Linda, who was nervously twisting a napkin in her lap. "Mom, there's a lot of stuff," she said meekly. "Especially in the garage. You never go in there." That wasn't true. I went in there often, just to stand and remember. "What about your father's things?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Todd leaned forward, his expression a perfect mask of sympathy. "Richard was a great man, a practical man. I think he'd want you to be practical too. We're not talking about sentimental things, of course, just the old broken stuff. Like those clocks." He said the word clocks as if it were contaminated. "They're not working. They're just collecting dust and probably attracting spiders. It's time to let them go, Judith. A clean slate." I felt a surge of defiance. "Your father loved those clocks, Linda," I said, looking directly at my daughter. He saw beauty in them. Linda looked torn, her gaze flickering between me and her husband. Todd, however, was relentless. "It's a beautiful sentiment, Judith. It truly is," he said, his tone patronizing. "But they're just objects. Your memories of Richard are what's important, and they aren't in a box of dusty old junk. Let us do this for you. Think of it as an early Christmas present. We'll handle everything. You won't have to lift a finger." He framed it as an act of service, a loving gesture, but it felt like an invasion. It was a strategic assault on the heart of my home, on the last physical pieces of my husband I had left. They saw a problem to be solved with a dumpster and a trip to the dump. They couldn't see the soul of the collection, the history, the love. Reluctantly, feeling cornered and emotionally exhausted, I finally gave in. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like defeat. "You can organize the garage, but you be careful with his things." Todd smiled, a wide, triumphant grin. "Don't you worry about a thing, Judith. We'll take great care of everything." The following Saturday, they arrived early, armed with heavy-duty trash bags and empty cardboard boxes. Todd was dressed in cargo shorts and a t-shirt, playing the part of the dutiful son-in-law. "Okay, team, let's do this," he announced, rubbing his hands together. He had an energy that felt aggressive in the quiet of my home. To make it easier on myself, I had scheduled a long-overdue doctor's appointment that morning. I couldn't bear to watch them paw through Richard's life, deciding what was worthy of keeping. Before I left, I stood at the garage door with Linda. "Please, honey," I said, my hand on her arm. "The box with the clocks. Just put it aside. I'll go through it later. Promise me." Linda nodded, her eyes full of genuine affection. "Of course, Mom, I promise. We'll just clean around them." I looked past her and saw Todd already pulling down old paint cans with a look of disgust. I chose to trust my daughter and left, a sense of deep unease following me all the way to the clinic. The appointment was a blur. All I could think about was Todd in my garage, his judgmental eyes scanning my husband's treasures. I drove home 2 hours later with a sense of dread so thick I could taste it. As I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I saw was the horrifyingly empty space on the curb where our trash cans usually sat. They were gone, and so was the large rental dumpster Todd had ordered. It had already been picked up. I walked into the garage, and my heart sank to my feet. It was clean, spotless, horribly, unnervingly clean. The old lawn chairs were gone, the stacks of National Geographic were gone, and the shelves Richard had built, the shelves that had held his clock collection for 30 years, were completely bare. I stood there, frozen, the silence of the garage now a-roaring in my ears. Linda and Todd were in the kitchen drinking lemonade. They looked up as I entered, their faces flushed from the work. "Mom, you're back," Linda said with a bright, forced smile. "Doesn't it look great? So much space." I couldn't speak. I just stared at her. Todd stood up, wiping his hands on a paper towel. "We got it all done," he said proudly. "Even got the dumpster company to do an early pickup. Super efficient." I finally found my voice. It came out cold and hard, a tone my own daughter had never heard from me. "Where are the clocks?" Linda's smile faltered. She glanced at Todd. It was Todd who answered, his voice devoid of any real empathy. "Judith, we did you a favor. They were in worse shape than we thought. Half the wood was rotted, springs were rusted out. They were just junk. Honestly, it's better this way. A fresh start." I looked at Linda, my eyes pleading. "You promised me," I whispered. She wouldn't meet my gaze. "Todd thought it was for the best, Mom," she mumbled, looking at the floor. "They were just taking up space." The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just that they had thrown away my husband's things. It was that they had done it behind my back, breaking a promise, and now they were telling me it was for my own good. They hadn't just cleaned my garage, they had scrubbed away a piece of my soul and called it a favor. The silence in the kitchen was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I stared at my son-in-law, at his smug, self-satisfied face, and a feeling I hadn't felt in years began to smolder deep within me. Pure, unadulterated rage, but I kept it hidden. Showing him my pain would only give him more power. "I see," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "You took it upon yourselves to decide what was junk and what wasn't." Todd shrugged, taking a sip of his lemonade. Someone had to make the executive decision, Judith. You were too emotionally attached to see it clearly. The condescension in his voice was a slap in the face. Linda looked miserable, caught between her loyalty to her husband's cold logic and her mother's visible hurt. She wrung her hands, saying, "Mom, we can buy you some new decorations, something nice and modern." They truly didn't get it. They thought this was about aesthetics, about decorations. They couldn't grasp that they had thrown away history, memory, and love. I didn't argue further. I simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving them in their sterile, self-righteous victory. They left a short while later, calling out cheerful goodbyes that I didn't answer. The moment their car was out of the driveway, I sprang into action. The dumpster had been picked up, Todd had said, but our regular municipal trash collection wasn't until Tuesday. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, even though the sun was still high, and hurried outside. My heart pounded with a desperate, frantic hope. I went straight to the curb. Our two large bins, one for trash and one for recycling, were standing there, waiting for pickup. With trembling hands, I lifted the heavy lid of the trash bin. The top was filled with the black trash bags they had used, but I could smell the familiar dusty scent of old wood. I started pulling the bags out, one by one, my dress getting smudged with grime. I didn't care. I felt like a detective, an archaeologist excavating the ruins of my own life. Down, down I went, until my fingers brushed against something hard and wooden. I tore the bag open. There it was. The sunburst clock from our honeymoon, its face miraculously unharmed. My breath caught in a sob that was half grief, half relief. I kept digging. In the bottom of that bin and the one next to it, crushed beneath bags of old newspapers and empty paint cans, I found them, all of them. Most were packed callously into a single, large cardboard box that was starting to buckle. A few of the more delicate ones were just tossed in among the garbage. One had a crack in its glass face, another a deep scratch along its side. The damage made my blood boil. It was one thing to throw them away, but to do it with such carelessness, such disrespect, it was monstrous. Working with a strength fueled by fury, I carefully lifted each clock, each piece of my husband's legacy, out of the filth and carried them back into the sanctuary of the now empty garage. That night, under the stark glare of a single light bulb, I didn't just retrieve some old clocks. I retrieved my dignity. For the next few days, I lived in the garage. I brought in a table and a comfortable chair and set up a little restoration station. With soft cloths, wood polish, and delicate brushes, I began the painstaking process of cleaning 50 years of dust and a day's worth of garbage off of Richard's treasures. The act was methodical, therapeutic. With every speck of dirt I wiped away, I felt like I was erasing a bit of Todd's oily arrogance. With every gear I gently cleaned with a cotton swab, I felt my own resolve hardening. The anger was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but it was transforming into something else. Focus. I was examining the clock with the cracked glass, a heavy dark oak piece with a very plain square face, when I saw it. I had been so focused on the damage that I'd almost missed it. On the back, etched into the wood near the small access panel, was a tiny, intricate symbol. It wasn't a brand name I recognized. It looked like a stylized V with a flame motif inside it. I remembered Richard tapping that very spot once, years ago. "The artist always signs his work, Judy," he'd said with a wink, "even if no one else is looking." At the time, I just smiled and nodded. Now his words echoed with new significance. My grandson had set me up with a new laptop last Christmas, and while I mostly used it for emails and recipes, I suddenly felt a new purpose for it. I took a clear, high-resolution photo of the symbol with my phone and uploaded it. I sat at my kitchen table, the clock beside me, and typed into the search bar, "Vintage Clockmakers Mark Vi with Flame." The first few pages were a wash of modern logos and fireplace company symbols. I felt a pang of disappointment. Maybe Todd was right. Maybe it was just junk, but I couldn't let it go. I refined my search. German Clockmakers Mark Mid-Century V. I scrolled through forums, collector sites, and digital museum archives. My eyes were starting to blur when I stumbled upon a small, obscure online community. The Gear and Dial Guild. It was a forum for serious clock collectors and historians. I navigated their clunky interface and found a section titled Mark Identification. With trembling fingers, I uploaded my photo and wrote a simple post. "Hello?" I typed. "I am trying to identify this mark on the back of an old wooden clock that belonged to my late husband. Can anyone help?" I hit post and leaned back, my heart thumping. I had no idea if I would get a response, but for the first time since that horrible Saturday, I felt a flicker of hope. I wasn't just cleaning up a mess anymore. I was on a mission. Richard had seen something special in these clocks, and I was going to find out what it was. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, my inbox had an email with the subject line, "Urgent, regarding your post on the Gear and Dial Guild." It was from a man named Dr. Samuel Miller, who introduced himself as a professor of design history and a specialist in post-war European timepieces. His tone was not that of a casual hobbyist, it was electric with academic excitement. He said my photo was extraordinary and asked if I might have any other clocks from the same collection. He offered to drive the 3 hours from his university to see them in person, at his own expense. A week later, a kindly-looking man with a tweed jacket and a gentle smile was standing in my garage. Dr. Miller handled the clocks with a reverence that brought tears to my eyes. He wore white cotton gloves and examined each piece under a magnifying jeweler's loupe. He didn't see junk, he saw art. He spent nearly 2 hours in silence, occasionally letting out a soft, "Good heavens," or a thoughtful, "Fascinating." Finally, he put down his loupe and looked at me, his eyes wide with discovery. "Ma'am," he began, his voice full of awe, "do you have any idea what you have here?" I shook my head, my heart hammering against my ribs. "This mark," he said, pointing to the V with the flame, "belongs to a man named Anton Vogel. He was a brilliant but reclusive German designer, a contemporary of the great mid-century modernists. But he wasn't a furniture maker. He was a master clockmaker, an engineer who believed timekeeping devices should be, as he put it, sculptures of pure function. He rejected all ornamentation. His work was considered too radical, too severe for the time." Dr. Miller gestured around the garage. After the war, he briefly immigrated to the United States. He worked for a major clock company, but they wanted traditional, decorative pieces. In his spare time in his own workshop, he created a private series of what he called experimental time sculptures. He made fewer than 20, each one unique, a study in form and material. They were never sold commercially. He gave them to friends or people he felt understood his vision. They became a legend among a very small circle of collectors, the lost Vogels. We knew they existed, but almost none had ever surfaced. He paused, taking a deep breath. "Until now. You don't have one of his clocks, my dear lady. You appear to have 12 of them. This isn't just a collection, this is the motherlode." I was speechless. Are they valuable?" I finally managed to ask. Dr. Miller let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Valuable?" The last confirmed Vogel to sell at auction, a single piece, went for over $80,000, and that was a decade ago. A complete, undocumented collection like this, it's priceless. To the right buyer, we are talking about a sum that would be, to put it mildly, life-changing. The garage, which had been a place of grief and violation, was suddenly filled with a blinding, triumphant light. Richard's junk wasn't just a memory, it was a legacy. And my arrogant son-in-law had thrown a winning lottery ticket in the trash. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, but a whirlwind I was in complete control of. Dr. Miller, bless his academic heart, guided me through the entire process. He connected me with a specialized auction house in Chicago that dealt in rare design and art pieces. They were, to put it mildly, ecstatic. They sent a team of experts who packed and insured the clocks with the kind of care usually reserved for the crown jewels. They treated me not as a confused old woman, but as the steward of a major cultural find. They listened to my stories about Richard, how he acquired each piece, and documented it all as part of the collection's provenance. I never once told them the clocks had recently spent a night in a garbage bin. That was my secret. The dark, ugly core of my motivation. I flew to Chicago for the auction, first class, a luxury I'd never imagined. I sat in a private skybox overlooking the auction floor, a glass of champagne in my hand, and watched as my husband's ticking treasures caused a sensation. The bidding was fierce, a frantic battle between international museums and wealthy private collectors. The final gavel fell on the Vogel collection for a number that made me feel dizzy. After the auction house's commission and taxes, the amount deposited into my modest local bank account was just over $1.2 million. For the first few days, I just looked at the number on my bank statement, a quiet smile on my face. The money itself was secondary. The real prize was the vindication. It was the confirmation of Richard's brilliant eye. It was the cosmic smackdown of Todd's smug ignorance. But vindication wasn't enough. I wanted justice. A specific, poetic, and inescapable kind of justice. I drove to Linda and Todd's neighborhood, a sprawling suburban development of identical beige houses with perfectly manicured lawns. They were very proud of their house, their status symbol. As I drove slowly down their street, I saw it. 2 doors down from them, a house slightly larger than theirs, with a prettier maple tree in the front yard, had a bright red for sale sign hammered into the lawn on Elm Street. A slow, delicious idea began to form in my mind. The revenge wouldn't be loud or confrontational. It wouldn't be a screaming match or a bitter email. It would be quiet, permanent, and utterly devastating. The next day, I called the realtor on the sign. I introduced myself and said, "I'd like to see the house on Elm Street, and I should tell you, I'll be a cash buyer." The plan was in motion. Todd had wanted me to have a clean slate and less stuff. Well, he was about to get his wish, just not in the way he'd ever imagined. I was about to become the most significant piece of clutter in his life. Moving day was a perfect sunny Saturday in early June. I'd timed it beautifully. I hired a local moving company and instructed them to arrive at precisely 9 a.m. I, however, arrived a half hour earlier, parking my sensible old sedan across the street. I sipped my coffee and watched. Soon enough, Todd emerged from his house in his weekend warrior attire, pristine white sneakers and an expensive polo shirt, to get his newspaper. He glanced at the moving truck rumbling down the street and scowled. I'd heard him complain to Linda on the phone about the previous owners, so I knew he was hoping for quiet, respectable neighbors who would keep to themselves. He watched as the large truck parked directly in front of the house 2 doors down. He folded his arms, the picture of a judgmental neighborhood watch captain. Then he saw me. I got out of my car, walked over to the moving foreman, and began pointing at the front door, giving instructions. Todd's jaw literally dropped. He stood frozen on his perfect lawn, newspaper forgotten in his hand. The confusion on his face slowly morphed into disbelief, and then into a dawning, sputtering horror. He looked at the truck, then at me, then back at the truck, as if his brain couldn't process the data. He stormed over, his face a mask of crimson outrage. Linda, who must have seen the commotion from the window, came scurrying out behind him. "Judith, what is going on? What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice a hoarse whisper, conscious of the movers watching us. I gave him my sweetest, most serene smile. "Why, Todd, I'm moving in," I said brightly. "Isn't it a lovely day for it?" He was sputtering, searching for words. You can't. How? This house it's..." He couldn't bring himself to say expensive. "Oh, I had a bit of a windfall recently," I said, my voice dripping with false innocence. "You know, after I took your advice and decided to get rid of some of that ugly old junk in my garage, it turns out some people have very strange taste. They'll pay a fortune for the oddest things." The color drained from his face. His eyes widened as the full, catastrophic weight of his mistake crashed down on him. He knew. In that single, horrifying moment, he knew exactly what he had thrown away. Linda just stared at me, her mouth agape, a flicker of something. Was it awe? Admiration? In her eyes. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, savoring it like a fine wine. Then I turned to the foreman. "Let's start with the living room furniture, please," I said, turning my back on my son-in-law and walking into my new home. I spent the rest of the day unpacking. From my new picture window, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of Todd's front porch. Every morning when he got his paper, every evening when he came home from work, every weekend when he mowed his lawn, he would see me. I would be his permanent, triumphant, next-door reminder of the day he mistook a priceless treasure for junk, and the quiet old woman he underestimated for a fool. The clocks were gone, but the sweet, satisfying tick-tock of my revenge had only just begun.